Good morning and welcome to episode 120 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined as I am each and every Thursday by Mia O'Brien. You can catch her on the show that she co-hosts Helmets and Heels each weekday from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern on 92.5 and 1010 XL. Mia, welcome back to the show. We spoke a little bit last Thursday as events were unfolding during the 2025 NFL Draft, but we haven't formally on the show at least caught up, and so excited to talk to you about not only the Jaguars but the rest of the AFC South as we break down the 2025 NFL Draft. So welcome back, Mia. How you doing?
You know, it's funny, Gus. As the countdown was going on our live stream, my first thought was, wow, the last time I sat here and spoke with Gus Logue on a live podcast, the world was a very different place. Travis Hunter was still going to the Cleveland Browns. Apparently, I do want to get this on the record because, some of our colleagues reached out to me and they were like, did you just break the Travis Hunter news? I, quite frankly, no one explicitly told me. No one explicitly said, hey, they're going up to 2 until probably 7 o'clock Eastern last Thursday was probably when I got the text of, oh yeah, it's happening. It was literally I'm not even kidding. Last Monday, in going through all of the smoke screens and notes and knowing what the needs were, I actually said to Kevin, I just looked at him and said, I know they love Travis. I know he's the number one player on the board. I know he's in the upper, can we just trade all the picks? And my boyfriend said, no, you can't do that. Physically, you can't do that. And so I just had that in the back of my mind. And then with little nuggets I kept hearing prior to our recording of the podcast last Thursday, I just started getting this inkling of, is this the bold move that they are actually trying to do? And obviously, that's what reality was. So I just want to make sure we began with that because, we had some colleagues who were texting me and they're like, you're the first one to put it out. I'm like, no, Rappaport put the smoke out there.
Right.
And
Jonathan
I want to just note
Sports
that.
too.
Right. I want to note that once Rappaport put it out there, I was like, let me do a little more prying here.
Right.
And just but no one explicitly told me until 7 o'clock last Thursday. Although by the time I left the Lemon Bar at 5:45, I had a pretty good inkling of where this thing was headed. And like I said, it's a different world now than it was 7 days ago when we last sat down to do this podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny going back and looking at various reports. So it seemed especially from Mike Silver of The Athletic, but certainly multiple people reported that the deal had been in place for 2 full weeks before the draft. And so the Jaguars pretty much knew that they were getting Travis Hunter. The only way that they wouldn't is if the Titans didn't take Cam Ward, and then the Browns would have taken Cam Ward at second overall. But I mean, the one thing that I think everyone knew was going to happen was that the Cam Ward was going to go to the Titans. And so it must have been crazy, being certainly not everyone in the building, obviously, but people in the know in the Jaguars' building, just kind of waiting around to the draft. I can't imagine kind of the giddiness and the excitement. It was funny, especially Tony Baselli going on various local media stations here at 1010, but also some Jaguars radio network stuff, and continuing to ask everyone that he went on their show, who do you want with the first round pick, just because he knew what was about to go down. So it's certainly entertaining to look back on in hindsight, but certainly entertaining to look to the future too, in terms of what the 2025 Jaguars will look like. We will talk more about the Jaguars in a little bit, but we're going to go in alphabetical order here. So starting out with the Houston Texans. Again, today we're breaking down and giving out letter grades for all 4 teams in the AFC South for what they did in the 2025 draft. So again, starting out with the Texans, here's a little image of their draft results under general manager Nick Caserio, who's been in that role for a few years now. They traded back in the first round. They originally owned the 25th overall pick, but they traded back and went with Jaden Higgins, wide receiver, Ohio State, 34th overall. Then Ariante Ursere, offensive tackle from Minnesota, 48th overall. Jalen Noel, wide receiver, Iowa State, 79th overall. Jalen Smith, cornerback, USC at 97th. Woody Marks, running back, USC at 116. I believe they moved up for Woody Marks in that pick. Jalen Reed, safety, Penn State at 187. Graham Mertz, our guy. Not really, but go Gators.
Yes, he is. He's the avocado man. I was the one who discovered that.
I'll let, for
not mashed potatoes. He is the avocado man.
If anyone here is also a listener or watcher of our 1010XL Gators YouTube page, then certainly you've heard a lot about Graham Mertz, but the Texans drafted him at 197. Then they went with Keontae Hamilton, defensive line Rutgers at 224, and Luke Lakey, tight end. Lachey, there we go. I've definitely been saying it. Lakey.
Learn the name. He's honestly the reason that I feel like I bumped up the Texans grade that I give them, which we'll get to here in just a second. I bumped it up a whole letter grade, and I feel like it's because of Luke Lachey, by the way. No bias here. No bias around here.
All right. So again, to recap, the Texans originally had the 24th overall pick, 25th, and they moved back to 34th overall. So they didn't have a first round selection. They also moved up later in the draft to get Woody Marks, the running back out of USC. So, Mia, just thoughts on any of the particular players, the process that the Texans took to get to their results. What did you think of Houston's draft?
Let's start with this. No, we won't start with Dell in the comments. Does Gus know who Nick Lachey is? That's a great question, though. Do you not know who Nick Lachey is?
It kind of rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you.
Oh, my God. Oh, my. Someone else in the comments besides Dell needs to, empathize with me right now. 98 degrees, Nick Lachey. Married to Jessica Simpson.
Okay.
Oh God. Oh boy.
I mean, I know the Kevin Bacon degrees thing. Is it the same thing with?
We're gonna move on from Lachey because we're gonna get back to Luke Lachey,
sorry.
who I actually think is the steal of the class for the Texans. A couple big broad points I want to make here.
Yeah.
First and foremost, as we look at the division as a whole, the biggest question is, and we'll circle back to this: who got better to change the division race? And ultimately, for me, I feel like the Texans and the Colts still have many of the same questions that they did 1 week ago as they do today. So I want to set that first and foremost. Additionally, themes from the Texans draft. The obvious is that they are leaning into the Cincinnati Bengals model. They don't care about who is in front of CJ Stroud, so long as he has plenty of weapons to throw downfield to. It's the Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase conversation. I want to, though, add to that, and I'm curious your take on this, Gus, because this is where, for me, I think philosophically where analyzing the Texans draft has to begin. I also look at their current offensive line as it is constructed. Cam Robinson will be 30. He is expected to be the day one starting left tackle on a 1-year contract. Laken Tomlinson, who they also acquired in the offseason, a veteran, will be 33 years old on opening day. They're starting left guard. 2 homegrown products and Jarrett Patterson and Juice Scruggs fill out the rest of the interior. And then they add Trent Brown at 32 years old to play right tackle, despite drafting Blake Fisher in the second round last year and obviously adding Ursary in the second round this year. As much as we want to compare the Texans philosophically to the Bengals, I actually look at the construction of that offensive line, their biggest question after CJ Stroud stepped back in his sophomore season. And I say this looks like the Jets offensive line from a year ago in front of Aaron Rodgers, where yes, in the interior, you had players that they drafted and were homegrown. Joe Tippmann, certainly Elijah Vera Tucker when healthy. They added Simpson in free agency, but their bookends were veteran stopgaps who were in their 30s. That was not sustainable. And what have you seen the Jets do? Last year, they drafted Olu Fashanu in the first round. He will now be their starting left tackle. This year, they go offensive line again. And so that is where I look at what the Jets did and I look at what the Texans are doing. And I say they are truly leaning into that Bengals mold. And is it actually the best thing for CJ Stroud in the long term? Because yes, Donovan Jackson went off the board 1 pick before they would have selected at 25 overall. And I have on good intel that they would have selected him. Tyler Booker and Gray Zabel were both off the table already. But why not take Josh Simmons in that situation?
Right.
Maybe they had him and Ursary graded out as a similar player. I think there's a chance Ursary ultimately ends up kicking inside to guard anyways. He was definitively the best. He's going to go in the second round. He's not sneaking into the first round offensive line prospect. And the Texans, there was a lot of smoke that they were trying to move up the board, which is my other big takeaway from their draft. Nick Caserio loves trading way too much. They did not make a selection that was actually their own in this draft. Every single draft pick that they made was either acquired in a trade that they made or that they received in a trade, which is absurd.
Know that. Good factoid.
It's way too much fun, and we'll get to that in our ultimate findings at the end. But for me, that's the big theme that I come away with. Yes, you add 2 playmakers, and certainly with the uncertainty surrounding Tank Dell, losing Stephon Diggs in the offseason, you had to address wide receiver. I respect that. But at the same time, the continued negligence, and I'm sure Taylor Dahl is probably listening to this right now and saying you could make the same argument for the Jaguars, who all they did was sign a bunch of veteran offensive linemen in free agency and then draft Wyatt Milam. So I respect those who say the Jaguars have the same question. But for the Houston Texans to have such an elite defense and to have, and I understand again the Tank Dell Stephon Diggs situation, have the quarterback situation stabilized, have the running back situation stabilized, and just opt to say, man, screw the offensive line. That for me is so fascinating, especially because of the comments from D'Amico Ryans all off season about how we have to be tougher and more resilient in the trenches.
Yeah, I don't understand this game plan from the Texans really. I think it does make sense to kind of like blow up the offensive line from last year because it was certainly one of the worst in the league, but like they haven't made enough improvements to make this current offensive line not repeat as the worst offensive line in the NFL. And like even if you are pointing to like Joe Burrow and the Bengals as kind of like a model, or even like Jacksonville, I think is a good shout. Like they went out and got Travis Hunter, and like they certainly made additions to the offensive line, but it's not like they signed any like former Pro Bowlers or like guys with like great pedigrees or anything like that. But like, man, when you just look at like the specific moves that Texans did make after, again, like kind of just taking a dynamite stick to their 2024 offensive line, I just don't really like any of the individual moves they made. Like even Ursere, I wasn't super high on. I think he got drafted like around the range that he should have been. And like maybe he'll provide a little bit of like flexibility and versatility for the Texans being able to play tackle or guard potentially. But I mean, man, like clearly the problem last year was the protection in Houston. And so, like, again, I think it was good of them to blow the whole thing up and to trade Laramie Tunsil and to trade Kenyon Green and to like not guarantee a starting job to Blake Fisher and other guys on the unit. But I would have liked to see them pour even more resources back into the offensive line. And so it's interesting. I think that I'm certainly a really big fan of Jaden Higgins, their first pick at 34th overall out of Iowa State. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Kenny Galladay in terms of like a player comparison, just stylistically, because like he's not necessarily like he definitely like checks all the boxes you need in terms of athleticism, but he's not going to like burn anyone down the sideline. He's just like a great contested catch guy. He comes down with pretty much every single ball, and so I think that makes a lot of sense for CJ Stroud. I also like in a vacuum like taking his former college teammate Jalen Noel because I think that like Noel has gotten a lot of comparisons to Christian Kirk as kind of like a vertical slot threat. And so I think that the two of them as a tandem could work really well side by side. And then especially with like Nico Collins attracting most of the attention. But like they do already have Nico Collins. They already traded for Christian Kirk. Tank Dell probably won't play this season, but hopefully he'll be back at some point for the Texans. And so like, again, I like in a vacuum a lot of the moves that the Texans made, but at the end of the day, like their offensive line, I still think projects to be one of the worst in the NFL, if not the worst. And like you got to help out your quarterback more than that. And so for this draft, I would probably go with a C minus.
Yeah, I
don't love trading up for Woody Marks. I don't know a lot about him, but this was such a deep running back class. Like why are you trading assets to go get a guy that like isn't really considered a consensus top 10 back even?
Well, and they gave up a third round pick to do it. That's the real reason for me. I gave them a B minus, but trending towards a C plus. So like I would put this at that like 80.1 grade, if you may. So like right on the borderline, or a 79.8.
Okay.
Because, and quite frankly, for me, that's just because I'm biased. And I think Luke Lachey is a steal in the 7th round because quite frankly, he had a potato throwing to him at quarterback for the last 2 years, in which he spent most of those 2 years injured. If you go back to his 2022, 2023 tape, this is a guy who, and I have it on good intel because I was in the building on multiple occasions with the folks out there in Iowa City, whether virtually or physically. And I was told by multiple people they thought he had a higher ceiling than Sam Laporta. And so that's where, like, for me, I just can't get past what so many people told me. And that's where I think that that's a steal for them, if only to succeed at Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. And so that's the reason I think I bump it up to that 79.8, rounded up to a B minus. But I agree. Something about USC players with Nick Caserio, because obviously they took Kalen Bullock last year, the safety, in the 3rd round. So they get Jalen Smith, who I think on the PFF consensus, he was like CB 14 or like the 126th overall prospect. They take him in the 3rd round. That's fine. There was a run on DBs. It's part of why the Jaguars took Caleb Branshaw when they did. I get that one. Trading up for Woody Marks, though, I honestly think Caserio did it just because he loves to make trades and he was bored and he didn't want to actually have to select at his own spot. And whatever. I again, philosophically for me, the biggest takeaway with the Texans is just that they basically said, screw it. we're going to just throw it downfield. And that's okay because they have a great defense. And so maybe they figure we're going to put up a ton of points and we're going to be able to pin our ears back. Good luck with that strategy. Cool with it. I also do want to note, Gus, before we go any further and we get to our next team, I do want to note that I actually went back through our 1010XL draft guide, which will be up for a couple more days if anybody wants to look at it, and look at how we graded some prospects. I did go through our consensus top 10s that we put together position by position. The Texans had the most players from our consensus draft guide who were selected. So they had Higgins, who was our wide receiver 6, Noel, who was wide receiver 10, Irsay was offensive tackle 6, and then Jalen Reed, right? They got him.
Yeah, the safety.
Yeah, the safety out of Penn State, which was good value for them. He was safety 10 for us. And so they had the most consensus picks from 1010XL of any of the 4 teams in the AFC South. But at the same time, I think the process to acquire some of those players was a little too wonky for me. And philosophically, I just don't agree with what they're doing.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And like, certainly like there's the old phrase or whatever of like you address needs in free agency so that you can like draft essentially like whoever you want or like best player available in the draft. But like certainly the Texans did, even after kind of tearing apart their offensive line, like they did add pieces in free agency so that it wasn't like a glaring need, but like it still was a glaring need, and they didn't address it as much as I would have liked to see. As someone who's like been super high on the Texans, I'm certainly one of those people that are like think of the Texans as like a sleeper contender, considering like D'Amico Ryans and the work that he does on the defense, and like how great CJ Stroud is and Nico Collins and a few other guys on that offense. But with the way that this offensive line is shaping up, like I just can't imagine that they're going to be truly a threat to contend for the Super Bowl. And I think that's like kind of like where they're gearing up to be, considering how good D'Amico and CJ Stroud are specifically. So yeah, I agree with you where it's like, even if they did come away with some good players, like the process just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And like for Josh Simmons, like he does have a pretty big medical red flag. And so like maybe he was just like completely off their board or like super low on their board or something like that. But even still, I probably would have taken Josh Simmons at 25 rather than moving down. All right, so let's move on from the Texans to the Indianapolis Colts. Mia, I thought the Colts had an annoyingly good draft, I'll be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
So I feel like this looks like every Colts draft of the last 9 years, if I'm being completely honest.
That's definitely true. Chris Ballard definitely loves his athletes. He's always scanning those relative athletic scores. But to sum it up, 14th overall, Tyler Warren, the Penn State tight end, fell to them with their original pick in the first round. Then they went with JT Tuimoloau, edge out of Ohio State at 45th overall. Justin Wally, cornerback from Minnesota at 88th overall. Jalen Travis, offensive tackle from Iowa State, 127th overall. DJ Giddens, running back from Kansas State, 151. Riley Leonard, quarterback from Notre Dame at 189. Tim Smith, defensive lineman from Bama at 190. And then Hunter Waller, safety from Wisconsin at 232. So, yeah, I think when you're looking at it, obviously it makes a lot of sense to give them like a plus grade for Tyler Warren, considering they didn't have to move up for him. And he was considered at least one of the safest prospects in the 2025 draft class. And like probably like the best landing spot for him might have been in Shane Steichen's offense in Indianapolis. Tight end was certainly one of, if not their biggest needs. And so Tyler Warren is like, just makes a ton of sense in terms of a player to team fit in the first round. But then beyond that, like JT Tuimoloau was one of my guys, certainly a guy that I think the Jaguars would have been interested in looking at in the second round if that had worked out. But obviously Jacksonville traded its 36th overall pick in the Travis Hunter deal. And then mostly Tyler Warren and JT Tuimoloau. Justin Wally, I think, too, was a great pick at 88th overall, kind of going hand in hand with what you're saying about the cornerback run in the third round. And I think DJ Giddens was a really good value pick in the fifth round to back up Jonathan Taylor. And so, yeah, I feel like the Colts have been known a little bit as a laughing stock recently, considering that like they haven't made like a clean sweep the way that the Jaguars did. The fact that they brought in Daniel Jones to compete with Anthony Richardson. But again, like I'm annoyed about how much I like this draft from Indianapolis.
See, here's my thing, Gus. Like Tyler Warren, very much, this is a perfect landing spot. The fact that Chris Ballard didn't have to give up any big draft capital to go get him, he fell to him at 14 is massive. And he wears the same number as Clark. He's going to be playing in Indianapolis. It's a match made in heaven. They want to pound the rock, and they're going to be able to do that. And Tyler Warren might be the best quarterback on the roster. So I had to sneak that one in there, and hopefully you guys caught that one. Because ultimately, I think Riley Leonard is Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. If you were to push them, smush them together and make a player, that player is Riley Leonard. And I still don't think that that player is as good of a quarterback as Tyler Warren. And so that's currently where the Colts big picture sit for me. It looks like every single draft I've seen from Chris Ballard in the last X amount of years, maybe a bit more college production as opposed to tantalizing relative athletic scores. But ultimately, until they have the quarterback, Shane Steichen's going to be able to do a lot of fun things with Tyler Warren, Jonathan Taylor, the treasure trove of wide receivers they've acquired in the draft over the last 4 or 5 years. But until they have the quarterback, this is no more than a 9-win team at its best. And that's unfortunate, but it's the state of affairs. One thing that I thought was very curious, and I'd love your take, Gus, when I was going through nationally, our friend Pete Prisco with CBS Sports, the Fox Sports crew, the Ringer, Mel Kiper with ESPN, going through everyone else's draft grades, I was fascinated by the critique regarding the offensive line, that people were surprised that they settled and did not take an offensive lineman until Jalen Travis, who some people still believe could be a project. For me, and maybe it's because in previous drafts I've been extremely high on both of these players. I actually kind of like how the Colts offensive line is sitting as it currently is constructed, because I was very high on Mac and Calvis when he was drafted out of Pitt last year. Quite frankly, the Jaguars had him on their board, thought he might end up falling here. Tanner Bortolini was also a favorite of the previous regime here in Jacksonville, and if he had fallen into their lap, they would have taken him. And so I got an extended look at him, just having that intel. And then, Quentin Nelson, yes, is getting up there in years. And so that's probably where that critique comes in from some of the national reporters, this idea of, well, what's the succession plan there? Because is Josh Sills or Danny Pinter or Dalton Tucker actually the guy? Given that you lost Will Freeze and you lost Ryan Kelly in free agency, Bernard Raymond and Braden Smith are good tackles. I think the Colts find themselves, in terms of bookends, they find themselves in the same situation the Jaguars have found themselves in for the better part of the last decade, and that they have good offensive tackles. They don't have elite offensive tackles. I don't think you need household names 1 through 5 across the offensive line, but I kind of like the line as it's currently constructed, and I found that critique rather fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely fair to address the Colts offensive line, considering they let both Will Fries and their center Ryan Kelly, I think that's his name, walking free agency. I believe they both signed with the Minnesota Vikings.
Correct.
But unlike the Texans, they actually have a stable of young guys that are playable. I didn't recognize the first name that you said, but Tanner Bortolini from Wisconsin.
Yeah. Mac Goncalves out of Pitt. He basically was drafted and stashed because he was coming off an injury his final year at Pitt.
Okay. Well, I certainly was a fan of Bortolini in the draft process, partly just because I liked him, but also partly because I thought that he would make sense for the Jaguars. But so, yeah, they have actual bodies and actual players that I think can play on the offensive line. And even if their O-line takes a little bit of a step back compared to last year, especially again, losing Will Fries and Ryan Kelly, 2+ starters on the interior, they've got enough guys. They've got 2 solid bookend tackles. They've still got Quentin Nelson. And so, certainly offensive line is a weak link unit. And if you just have one really bad guy, then that can kind of be catastrophic for the entire unit. But I think that they have enough there that it won't be catastrophic. And I just really getting Tyler Warren again, but what Lou Anarumu's defense is setting up to be. As a football fan, I can't wait to see what it looks like, especially just going from Gus Bradley, one of the most vanilla kind of game planners in the NFL, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to Lou Anarumo, who's one of the best individual game planners in the NFL. And I think that certainly over the past couple of years, the talent level for Cincinnati's defense, where Anarumo came from, has dropped off. And so I appreciate Chris Ballard actually diving into defensive resources. They spent pretty heavily on secondary and free agency, and then to get JT Tuimoloau, who I really liked as a prospect in general, but I think he makes so much sense as a fit in Indianapolis specifically, because he's kind of less of a one-on-one, just incredible disruptor that will just like embarrass anyone that he lines up across. He's more so like the just like chaos creator and like a pocket pusher, but that's still valuable, especially considering the Colts already have like a one-on-one dynamic threat in to Latu, their first round pick from last year. And so I think that's a really fun young tandem. Again, like they put a lot of investments into the secondary, both in the draft and free agency. And so as a Jaguars fan or analyst, like Jaguars fans should probably be a little bit nervous, but just as like a football fan, I'm really excited to see what Lou Anarumo's defense looks like in 2025 for Indianapolis.
I would argue what the Jaguars did with their offensive line and free agency is what the Colts did along their secondary. They knew it was a problem, and so they just threw a bunch of money at it, and if only for stopgap purposes, they hope that it'll hold up for 2025. I gave the Colts a B-, trending more towards a B for all the reasons you outlined, Gus. Again, I just come back to they still don't have a quarterback. I do want to note just how perfect the Tyler Warren selection was, because I didn't realize how awful. I knew that they have a lot of bodies in that tight end room in Indianapolis, thanks to our colleague Trent Osborne, who of course is from Indiana. I knew there were a lot of bodies and athletic specimens, but not a lot of tight ends in the tight end room for the Colts. They were dead last in receptions last year across the league with 39. They were second to last in tight end receiving yards with 467 and second to last in total receiving touchdowns with 2. So yeah, this is immediately an upgrade. They needed Tyler Warren. I think he's a fun chess piece for Shane Steichen, but until they figure out the quarterback situation, for me, it's only going to be a 9-win team, which always could be good enough to win the AFC South, as we've seen the last few years.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the quarterback situation. I certainly do not think that bringing in Daniel Jones as competition is like the right way to go about it. But since they did do that, like I'm just kind of looking at it from the draft perspective. Like I don't really mind that they didn't take a quarterback sooner, because like what quarterback would they have taken sooner, especially having already Anthony Richardson and Danny Dimes. And so I'll give the Colts a B+, because yeah, certainly quarterback is an issue, but I think it's understandable that they didn't find a potential answer in the draft. And they found a potential answer at like backup quarterback, maybe in Riley Leonard. I did like him as like a day 3 prospect to just like throw into a quarterback room. But yeah, I'll go with a B+. And if you do want, I should have mentioned this at the top. Hacker and I, about 3 weeks ago, episode 101, gave out grades for the AFC South, each team's offseason going into the draft. So if you're interested more about like the Colts quarterback situation, the Texans offensive line situation, et cetera, then go check out episode 101 that I did with Hacker. So Mia, we both gave B-, B+, so a solid B grade for the Colts, like what they did, even if they don't have a quarterback of the future. Let's move on to the Jaguars real quick. I've certainly done my fair share of breakdowns of the Jaguars' class on this show. But again, since we haven't talked to you since the first round, you can give us your thoughts here. Travis Hunter, cornerback / wide receiver out of Colorado, second overall pick. Caleb Branshaw at 88th, Wyatt Millam at 89th, Baishol Tootin at 104, Jack Kaiser at 107, Jalen McLeod, 194, Ryan Lane the third at 200, Jonah Monheim at 221, and LaQuint Allen at 236. Neo, you can actually check out me and I's grades for each individual pick on 1010xl.com/Jaguars. We did a live draft tracker, kind of giving instant analysis and grades for each pick. So you can go back and look online on our website at like how me and I graded each individual player that the Jaguars selected. But as a whole, Mia, what do you think of the Jacksonville Jaguars' 2025 draft?
Yeah, it's probably a B+ for me, Gus. Probably rate it more trending towards an A-, ultimately because of the swing to go get Travis Hunter.
Right.
And again, we will reflect big picture on the division here as we recap all 4 teams in the AFC South. But so much of where this division goes from here hinges on 2 players and their trajectory, Travis Hunter and Cam Ward. What I will give a grade to, and we'll give a definitive A, and it's funny because Dell just put it in the comments too, we've already crucified Nick Caserio for his love of trades and how he navigated the board for better or worse last week. You look at Chris Ballard, maybe he was too scared. Maybe all of his guys just fell to him. You don't have to make trades to have a good draft. Then we'll get to the Titans here momentarily. For me, when it comes to navigating the board, James Gladstone had the best weekend of any general manager in the AFC South. That's not bias. It's the reality of you had the cojones, as Todd McShay put it, to trade up for the one blue chip player with no question marks in this draft. You said, you know what? If he's going to fill two needs, okay, I'll give up my second round pick. I'll do it because I have less questions about him than I do anyone else in this draft. Let's just go get the surefire thing. I appreciate that conviction and confidence. But then, as Robert just noted, the fact that then he recouped those 2 third-round picks next year, despite losing next year's first-round pick, for me, as I watch Nick Caserio give up a third for a running back who we have no idea if he's even going to break through in their lineup with Dameon Pierce and Joe Mixon ahead of him, like that for me is a masterclass. And ultimately, that's why I just think that Gladstone did a great job where even if the players, as Mike Silver outlined in The Athletic in the great War Room profile that he wrote earlier this week, even if the players they initially targeted weren't there, the Jaguars had contingency plans. And for James Gladstone to come away with 8 of those 9 selections having been on his short list of 31 players that he really wanted, that for me, it's a win for him because those are the guys he went in wanting. And it's a win for Jacksonville because he also was able to recoup that draft capital and keep it moving with pieces that, well, yes, maybe they're not all going to start day one. Rome wasn't built in a day, folks. And I think you need to understand that the Jaguars are hamstrung by many of these veteran free agent contracts that they either can't get out of or they have to play out this year before they can completely reload this lineup next year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the Travis Hunter trade / pick / acquisition is certainly an A+, because like they did give up draft capital, but like you had to have given up draft capital in order to get Travis Hunter. Like he wouldn't have fallen.
It was never going to be free, people. Like,
yeah,
I don't
so, like,
know where.
I don't think the Jaguars should be penalized for giving up assets, and especially when you consider the assets. Like during the live stream that we did for the first round last Thursday, I think that me and Hacker and Campo were all super surprised, like not just that it happened, but like mostly that the trade wasn't like a Godfather offer, like
Correct.
a draft day movie type offer where it's like 3 consecutive first round picks.
And that's
in a
people
row.
nationally, Gus, people nationally are acting as if that's what it was. It's really not that much, especially when you consider they then moved up in the 4th round and they were able to select Bashal Tutin with that pick.
Yeah, I said this, I think it might have been yesterday's show, but it was sometime this week. Like Gladstone is doing like what the good GMs do, like the Brett Veaches and the Howie Rosemans and the Les Needs of the world, where like they're not afraid to be aggressive with draft capital. And part of the reason is that they're so good at like loading up draft capital for the sake of those moves. For every time that they get aggressive with draft picks, nearly twice as often they're like, I guess, quote, conservative with draft picks and trading back to accrue more capital. And so that's what we saw on day 3 when the Jaguars moved off their 70th overall pick to go back to, I think, like somewhere in the 4th round in like the early 100s, but they did pick up 2 2026 third rounders from the Lions. So certainly great process in terms of the trades, I think, but also great process in terms of the player. Like we've talked plenty about Travis Hunter, but beyond that, I think when you're looking at like the run on cornerbacks you talked about, and then it makes sense to get Caleb Bransall there. But then there was a run on like linebackers and running backs immediately after the Jaguars' 4th round picks of Bashal Tutin and Jack Kaiser. So it makes even more sense that they got them where they got those guys. And then even like Jalen McLeod, from like reports from Mike Silver at The Athletic, Gladstone was seriously considering drafting Jalen McLeod in the 4th round with one of those 2 early 100 picks. But instead, McLeod fell to the 6th round, and the Jaguars were able to get great value, at least according to their draft board, to get tweener linebacker / edge rusher, defensive end guy that can get after the passer. And certainly the Jaguars need help in that. And so if I'm nitpicking, honestly, I think the Jaguars maybe could use some more size on their defense, because I think that obviously even if they did sign Emmanuel Ogbah immediately following the draft, which is certainly a good process of like not forcing a defensive line pick and then just like going up and calling Ogbah's agent once the draft ended and you didn't get as many defensive linemen as maybe you would have liked. But even beyond defensive line, like they got some kind of like smaller guys in the secondary, even some smaller guys at linebacker throughout the offseason. And so that's like, I guess my only concern about the Jaguars' process is like, it's great that you've got like explosiveness. They certainly have that. And so like they're leaning more towards speedy athletes than huge athletes. But I wonder if the defense could maybe use a couple of more huge athletes. Again, Emmanuel Ogbah certainly helps that out. But yeah, I would give this, since Travis Hunter is an A+ pick, and then everyone else I feel like is like between like a C and a B+. Like I think it does average out to be like an A- or a B+, like a 90.1, 89.8, the way that you were talking earlier about the Texans grade.
A couple quick notes from our YouTube chat, which we always appreciate you guys who are tuning in live right now. Yes, to Robert's point of I think Lane can be a sneaky good backup safety, and I think Ransaw may start at safety. I would expect that to be the expectation.
Ooh,
If
you think
nothing
Ransaw
else,
could start at safety?
I do.
Wow. I meant to ask, I think it was JP on yesterday's show. Like, I assume Eric Murray is going to be one of the starters at
Yes.
safety because of the like resources they put into him.
They're very
signing him in
high on
free
him
agency.
too.
But
Like the
Eric Murray
Texans.
will be a
Yeah.
starter.
Everyone in
But
Houston may not be high on him, but people in the building are high on Eric Murray.
so it'll be really interesting to see whether Caleb Ransaw can win that starting job as soon as week 1 or not. But sorry, I cut you off. I don't know what else you're gonna say.
That was one, and then two. The line from Liam Cohen in Mike Silver's piece where he says we have 2 first-round edges,
3.
3 with Eric Armstead, if you want to
Right.
include him along the interior. We have 3 first-round defensive linemen plus Mason Smith, who's a second-round defensive lineman. And he says, in jest, how much more do we realistically need? I thought that was fascinating for many reasons.
Mhm.
Essentially saying we have the talent in the building. The coaching is the issue, which Cedric just pointed out in the YouTube chat as well. And it's an interesting philosophy of we like the guys we have because so many people in Jacksonville, I don't know if they like the guys that they have on the roster as it's currently constructed. And I do think it's fascinating knowing full well the Rams went ahead and paid Poona Ford to come across town in Los Angeles, where, of course, both James Gladstone and Liam Cohen previously worked, to bring him over to fortify a Sean McVay operation, which has gone from being the fastest outfit in sports to now being we're going to ground you and pound you because we recognize our quarterback is in the twilight of his career. Now, Trevor Lawrence is not, and so maybe that's the reason to say we're leaning all the way in to the speed and just trying to be one of the most athletic teams on a football field.
Yeah. Question from Dell. Do we know if the new regime is higher on our D tackles than others are? I think it just does come back to the Liam quote, but go ahead.
Yeah. They do like Jordan Jefferson and Mason Smith. I don't know how high they are, but I do know they like both players. And certainly, we'll just put it this way, more than some of the drama that surrounded the second round pick from 2024 between the coaching staff and the front office a year ago. I hope they like Mason Smith for his own sake, because from some of the stuff I've heard, like, I can't imagine feeling like essentially a child of divorce in that the GM, which was documented in the Jaguars in-house video production of The Hunt, literally walked into the war room and told everyone that we're drafting Mason Smith at 42. Like, that's what we're doing. And then to have the coaching staff make the decision to make him inactive for better or worse, whether it was because of the weight, because he was immature, but then you got the front office pushing back on, like, the poor guy, like, I feel bad for
Right.
him. I hope nothing but the best for him, because I cannot imagine being 21 years old and having to go through that with
Absolutely.
those two pillars, if you may, fighting at each other.
Yeah, and to go back to the Liam quote, I think it's particularly interesting how he said, like, we already have 3 first rounders on the defensive line. How many more do we need? Because he also said that, I'm pretty confident that it was at the NFL owners meetings, but he definitely said like pretty much that exact quote earlier in the offseason. And so when I heard it for the first time, I thought that like it was something that he had like kind of prepared himself to say, because like he kind of knew that the Jaguars weren't going to be investing in the defensive line. So he was like, oh, like here's like the rationale behind it. But it seems like, especially after hearing it again in the Mike Silver, the Athletic piece, it was just like Liam Cohen's true opinion. Like, we have 3 first rounders. What else do we need? And so just kind of funny confirming that that's truly what he thought. But to move on and to wrap up, we've got one more team, of course, to talk through in the AFC South. It is the Tennessee Titans. I'm trying to pull up their full draft here. First overall, even though no one is really talking about it, thanks to Jacksonville, Cameron Ward, quarterback, Miami. They got potentially their quarterback of the future, unlike the Indianapolis Colts. But Cam Ward goes first overall. Then they go with a guy that Mia was hyping up a lot on this show, Olu Deho. I think he actually say that again.
Oluwafemi Oladejo. You could call him Femi.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he does go by Femi, not Alo. But the edge out of UCLA, formerly converted from linebacker, 52nd overall pick. Kevin Winston Jr., Penn State safety, one of my guys at 82nd overall. Chimmery Dyke, or DK, wide receiver out of Florida. I mean, go Gators, but that was a
You
surprising
heard it
pick.
here first, folks. You heard it also on Mia's Mock Draft Mondays if you
Mm.
listened or read that.
So
I
103rd overall for him.
I had into, and it was funny, Gus, sitting in the media war room because so many people yelled out, "Oh my God, that's a reach." I had multiple people around the league say he's not going to get out of the 4th round. Don't be
Interesting.
surprised. And it's because of the return ability, and it's because he absolutely smashed the pre-draft process, and he's a great guy off the field, intangibly rich, some might even say.
There you go. Another intangibly rich guy is Gunnar Helm, the tight end out of Texas at 120 overall. Then wide receiver, or Alec Aomenor, wide receiver from Stanford at 136. He fell a little bit more than I expected. I assume it's because of injuries. Maybe teams just think he's slow. I don't know. Jackson Slater, interior offensive line from Sacramento State at 167. I know he had a lot of fans in and outside of Jacksonville as kind of like a day 3 developmental guy. Marcus Harris, cornerback from Cal at 183. And then Kalel Mullings, running back from Michigan at 188. Mia, what do you think about what the Titans did in the 2025 draft?
Yeah, big theme for me is this idea of, number one, great job by Mike Borgonzi in his first draft of raising the floor and at the very least having a strategic plan. We'll get to his exact strategy that I may not agree with fully, but I appreciate him having a plan. And then secondly, this idea of heavy on potential but thin on sure things. The Titans recognized how many holes they had. And so that's why he was comfortable. Mike Borgonzi was comfortable with trading back from pick 35. In doing so, you take yourself out of that second tier of the wide receiver class. You could have had Jack Betch. You could have had, I don't think Luther Burden had gone at that point. You could have had a guy who many believe is a surefire plug and play wide receiver, which do you have that right now in Tennessee outside of Calvin Ridley? Yes, you add Tyler Lockett, who's in the twilight of his career. And so once again, we go back to this idea of the Tennessee Titans saying, well, whatever, we're going to bring in this veteran and he's going to provide a spark. And Randy Moss and DeAndre Hopkins and Julio Jones, and I can just keep on going, didn't work out in Nashville. And so that's where that part was interesting for me. But it is very clear from a strategic standpoint that they recognize our pass catchers have to get better. We did invest in the offensive line in the 2 years of Rand Carthen as the GM, and especially with Bill Callahan as the offensive line coach last year. But now we need to create some depth. And so bringing in Slater to do that. Marcus Harris, part of a Cal secondary that I feel like every national analyst I spoke with was extremely high, from the safety spot with Craig Woodson, with both corners, Noel Williams going to Kansas City. And so that's a great value pick for me as well. Don't forget it too. I do have a note. Xavier Restrepo in free agency. Lot of Ten XL listeners, because you're all Miami fans, or many of you are at least. We're not happy with the Restrepo slander on the Superstation. Well, good news, folks. He's reunited with Cam Ward. To that point, though, it goes back to my overarching theme of Mike Borgonzi opted for more throws at the dartboard than he did larger darts that guarantee you to be closer to that center point on the board that you want to be at. And all of this hinges on Cam Ward. If Cam Ward's good, nothing else really matters.
Yeah.
If he can't elevate the play of these day 3, day 2 guys, late day 2 guys that you selected because you didn't want to use that premium capital on guys who were considered more sure things, then you're right back to where you currently stand.
Someone said in the comments, Cedric Holmes 48. Just remember, without an offensive line, Cam Ward is going to be running for his life like Will Levis. I do think that, like someone else said, Robert, who I guess lives in Pittsburgh, said Dan Moore isn't good. It's all that he hears in Pittsburgh. I think that even if the Titans seem to have overpaid for Dan Moore's services in free agency, like they got Dan Moore, they got Lloyd Cushenberry. I think that was last year.
But didn't he retire or something like that?
Oh, did he?
I thought he did. Maybe he's back. Somebody else retired for them. Maybe it was it was Cushenberry. Well, he's listed as questionable. I thought he retired because someone in the chat confirmed that. Someone from the Titans offensive line did retire.
So, but as you were saying, Mia, over the past 2 off seasons, they have invested in the offensive line. Certainly, they can continue to do that, especially considering that they have first overall rookie quarterback in tow now. But the Titans do also have Brian Callahan, which even if it was a nepo hire, Callahan is one of the best offensive line coaches in the league, and so I would trust him more than pretty much anyone else not named Jeff Stoutland in Philadelphia to be able to develop guys like Jackson Slater and everyone else that they have on their offensive line. And so certainly fair to point that out as a question mark, but I'm not as worried about Tennessee's offensive line as maybe other people are, or I'm certainly a lot more worried about Houston's offensive line. I would have liked to see the Titans add another pass catcher because I certainly am a fan of Calvin Ridley's game. I think he's a really good player, but he's also kind of in that fringe territory of low end wide receiver 1, maybe would be best as just a great wide receiver 2 playing alongside someone. So I think that getting DK in the 4th round, even if it seemed like a reach at the time, according to public perception, that was probably a solid pick. I like bringing in Tyler Lockett, even if he might not have many miles left on his tires, but it would have been nice to see them get another bona fide just pass catcher, even if it was a tight end. I think that just would have helped out Cam Ward a lot. And so, like you said, it's going to be the Cam Ward show. It's kind of Cam Ward or bust. I do like a lot of the additions that they made on defense, but since their defensive coordinator, is it Anthony Weaver or is Weaver the Miami
No, it's
Dolphins?
the other guy from Tennessee.
Is it something or maybe?
Wilson, right?
Denard Wilson?
Yeah, Denard Wilson.
Yeah, that sounds right. So I'm pretty sure it's Denard Wilson, but whoever the defense coordinator is definitely came over from the Ravens tree where they have so many coverage disguises and where communication is so paramount. But in order to have super cool disguise coverages that require a lot of communication, you also need a really good pass rush. And so I think that the Titans did their secondary and even their second level of their defense, but the pass rush is still pretty horrific. And so I feel like they're certainly, obviously, since they had the first overall pick a couple years away from truly contending, and there's still a lot of holes on the roster. And so it's going to come down to Cam Ward.
And I think it's very important what you just noted, Gus, because I was very high on Femi Oladejo throughout the draft process. If he was to come to Jacksonville, where he would be expected to be edge 3. When you look at the Titans, knowing that Harold Landry was a cap casualty, yes, they have Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat in the middle. They certainly have Arden Key, who built the city of Jacksonville. But outside of that, Sebastian Joseph Day, kind of on his last leg. Jermont Jones, Otis Reese, Cody.
Yeah, they have some pretty interesting pieces on the interior, and so maybe they'll be able to game up some pass rush a little bit, but that edge rotation is not looking very pretty.
And they're going to need Oladejo to contribute right away. I don't know if he can. I think he's going to elevate your locker room. I think he's intangibly rich. I think on this team he would be the ultimate. I mean, imagine if you had Ogba and him. Forget it. I mean, all of a sudden you're we might have one of the best edge rooms in the division, let alone in the AFC.
Right.
But in that organization, it's going to take more than him. And to kind of wrap here, Gus, I just go back to what you just said. When I look at this conversation we've had today, when I look at the AFC South as a whole, the reason we're doing this exercise is who got better via the draft. And I can't help but feel like the Texans and the Colts have the same questions they did 1 week ago. The Jags, if Travis Hunter hits, all of a sudden take a massive leap. The Titans, if Cam Ward hits, all of a sudden take a massive leap. And in order to take that next step, both those teams either had to stink, which they both did last year, or take a massive swing. And that's exactly what they did. By the way, I know our friend Pete Prisco with CBS Sports has still been outspoken about it this week. He still thinks the Titans should have taken Travis Hunter, number 1 overall. And I know he's not alone in thinking that too. And that is where there will also always be not just this ultimate, well, if they hit question, but there will also potentially, if Travis Hunter hits, be the great what if for Tennessee Titan fans if they had selected the Colorado corner wide receiver instead of Cam Ward.
Absolutely. I would say more so for Travis Hunter, but even Abdul Carter, I know a lot of people in and outside of Tennessee were maybe just take or especially take the Giants' offer, because they did make an offer to move up to the first overall pick. So whatever that offer was, just take that, and then you get either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, and then you can continue to build up this roster so that it's truly prepared as a solid ecosystem for a rookie quarterback to step into. And so Cam Ward, I think, is definitely going to have to put the team on his back a little bit as soon as he starts, pretty much, which we all expect will be week 1. And so to put a grade on the Titans, I would say B minus. Like they got a potential franchise
Oh, really?
quarterback.
I'm going to give him more of a B plus, A minus.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's also because I just felt like I felt vindicated by the DK pick, and because I am encouraged by this idea of he's your speedster on the outside. That means you're not pigeonholing Calvin Ridley into that role like Press Taylor tried to here. Io Maynor becomes your big-bodied. This upset me when I was looking through a couple other reviews of the draft class. Gabe Davis comp, but not wrong. Good Gabe Davis in Buffalo, where he was also once a 4th-round pick around that 126 pick. And then you couple that with Tyler Lockett, who's going to play primarily slot for you. And like, that's where I look at it. And I'm like, if nothing else, Titans, you've got your X, your Z, and your slot guy. Like, credit to you. I don't think it's the quality you could have had, but at the very least, you identified that and coupled it with the pick of Gunnar Helm in the 4th round at tight end.
Yeah, certainly I think it was an above average draft, especially considering, again, they got Cam Ward, the consensus #1 quarterback in the draft, which I think you could argue that he's like maybe not deserving of like the first overall selection, but he's absolutely deserving of like a top 5 pick without a doubt, absolutely deserving of being the first quarterback taken off the board. So it makes sense for Tennessee. I think at the end of the day, we do value the Jaguars' draft higher than anyone else. Partly and maybe mostly because they did get Travis Hunter, who's debatably the best player, not just in this draft, but like the best player in several recent drafts to have come out of college. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at the process of all 4 teams, maybe there's a little bit of bias from us just in terms of like location bias, since we do cover the Jaguars. So we have a better understanding of the process. But at the same time, again, looking at all 4 teams, I think we can agree that we like where the Jaguars are heading. And Hacker and I really came to the same sentiment, honestly, on, again, episode 101, when we were talking about what the AFC South teams did in the 2025 offseason before the draft. But Mia, I think that'll do it. I don't really have anything else. I don't know if there's anything else you want to get off your chest before we get out of here, but I guess not. We will be back, or I will be back tomorrow on Friday at 9:04 a.m. Eastern with Hacker. Topic TBD, but we will be back very soon. Mia will be back next Thursday. So until then, Mia, thanks as always. Listeners, viewers, and especially our commenters, thank you as always. See you guys tomorrow. Take care.